I want to train with my brother and my grandfather every day after school.
The All England Club had never seen a week quite like this one. A 21-year-old from the Philippines had transformed the most prestigious tournament in tennis into a celebration of Filipino pride, packing center court with flag-waving fans and breaking viewership records with every match. But when she walked off the court after her fourth-round defeat, she took something with her that the tournament would desperately miss. Now, in the aftermath of Alex Eala's heartbreaking exit, the economic reality has become impossible to ignore. Stadiums that had been filled with roaring crowds are now half empty. Ratings that had been surging have plummeted. And in a move that has stunned the tennis world, ticket prices have crashed to as low as £6 for the remaining matches. The numbers are staggering. Just days before her match against Jasmine Paolini, bettors had placed their confidence overwhelmingly in Eala, accounting for 84.64% of the total player bet count against the world number 17. The Eala Effect was a phenomenon that the WTA had stumbled upon, a force that had single-handedly transformed the tournament's economics. The sponsors are scrambling, the organizers are panicking, and the fans are demanding answers. Because when you build your tournament around a phenomenon, you cannot simply move on when that phenomenon disappears. The economic aftershock of Eala's exit has exposed a harsh truth that the WTA refuses to accept. This is not just about ticket prices. This is about what happens when a sport discovers a global superstar and then fails to recognize her value. And as Wimbledon struggles to fill its seats at record low prices, one question echoes through the empty stands. Did the WTA realize what they had before it was too late? The All England Club had never seen anything quite like it. A 21-year-old from Manila was transforming the hallowed grounds of Wimbledon into a home away from home. And the tennis world was struggling to process what was happening. When Alexandra Eala arrived at the 2026 championships as the 29th seed, she was already a history maker as the first Filipina player ever seeded in the Wimbledon main draw. But what unfolded over the next week would shatter every expectation and redefine what was possible for Philippine tennis. Her journey began on court 12, where she dismantled Mexico's Renata Zarazua in a commanding 6-1, 6-2 victory. It was a straightforward win, but the crowd told a different story. Hundreds of Filipino flags dotted the stands, chants of Alex echoed across the grounds, and Eala herself was taken aback by the support. I was really surprised. The Filipinos keep surprising me in good ways, she admitted after her victory. I know how notoriously difficult it is to get tickets to this event. To have what I would call a full house of Filipinos is amazing. I never would have thought that at Wimbledon I would have a home crowd. Super thankful, and I really enjoyed it. The Filipina diaspora had mobilized. Nurses from London, engineers from Manchester, students from across the UK had descended upon Wimbledon to witness their countrywoman make history. And this was just the beginning. In the second round, Eala faced Australia's Maya Joint. After dropping the first set 3-6, she displayed the resilience that had become her trademark, roaring back to win 6-2, 6-0. The crowd grew louder, the legend grew larger. It's obviously an amazing thing for me to do that for my country, she said after booking a last 32 tie with reigning Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek. I really appreciate that I'm able to share this with the nation, but I think, first and foremost, it makes me super proud because of the work that I've put in. Eala was sporting a custom Nike visor bearing a phrase in Tagalog which translates to, "Every dream begins as a seed. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped." That philosophy would prove prophetic. By the time she stepped onto center court to face defending champion Iga Swiatek, the world was finally paying attention. Swiatek was the world no. 3, the reigning queen of Wimbledon, and arguably the most dominant force in women's tennis. But Eala had beaten top 10 opponents before. And on that Saturday in London, she was about to produce the biggest upset of her career. When the final ball landed, center court erupted. Eala had won at center court. She had beaten the defending champion. She had become the first Filipino in history to reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles tournament. The world was officially on notice. What Eala did not realize was that her presence was becoming economically significant. The Eala Effect was not just about filling stadiums, it was about transforming the entire tournament experience. And the WTA had stumbled upon something they had not anticipated, a global phenomenon that transcended the sport itself. But in tennis, as in life, what rises must eventually fall. While Eala was captivating crowds at Wimbledon, something extraordinary was happening 6,000 miles away. In Manila, an entire nation had stopped to watch. Approximately 8,000 fans gathered at the Philsports Arena in Pasig to watch Eala's fourth-round clash against Jasmine Paolini. The venue was packed, the energy was electric. And despite heavy rains battering the city, no one was leaving. They had come to witness history. Sports arenas around the country hosted watch parties for thousands of supporters to cheer on the 21-year-old, who had broken new ground for her nation just by winning a match here. One arena near Manila opened its doors 4 hours ahead of the local scheduled start time of 9:30 p.m. so fans could secure their seats. The images of Eala's victory over Swiatek had already gone viral, capturing the imagination of almost the entire 120 million population of the Philippines. Eala's rise came at a time when the country was hungry for sporting success. The nation had not had many female sports stars to cheer on the global stage, with men's boxing legend Manny Pacquiao and gymnast Carlos Yulo flying the flag. But Eala was different. She represented something new. Eala, for her part, was deeply aware of the responsibility she carried. It's so sentimental to be able to wear things or to carry parts of my culture with me on court, because of course it's a huge reason as to who I am, she explained. And for me to be able to represent the Philippines in Wimbledon, I guess, and in the biggest stages in the world, it means so much to me. Her fans were not just watching, they were mobilizing. Eala stayed on court for as long as possible to sign autographs after her matches, recognizing the sacrifice her supporters had made to be there. Of course, I also want to give them time, my time, Eala told reporters. It's extremely hard to get tickets here at Wimbledon, so I'm very happy with the support. What Eala did not realize was that her presence was becoming economically significant. The Eala Effect was not just about filling stadiums, it was about transforming the entire tournament experience. And the WTA had stumbled upon something they had not anticipated. A global phenomenon that transcended the sport itself. But in tennis, as in life, what rises must eventually fall. The stage was set for another chapter in Eala's fairy tale run. Center court was packed with tennis royalty, including legends Billie Jean King and Roger Federer watching from the stands. The sun was baking down on the All England Club. And standing across the net was Jasmine Paolini, the 13th seed, a two-time Grand Slam finalist, and a woman determined to stop the Filipina juggernaut. From the very first point, the match was a battle. Eala sent her opening forehand long, a nervous start that signaled the pressure of the moment. Paolini, who had been struggling with a foot injury earlier in the year, started fast and surged into the match. The Italian's aggression was relentless, and her serve was finding the corners. Eala, for the first time in the tournament, looked unsettled. But the 21-year-old refused to go quietly. She began to find her rhythm, her ground strokes gaining power and precision. The crowd, which had been overwhelmingly in her favor throughout the tournament, roared with every point she won. But as the match progressed, something became increasingly clear. The Filipino fans who had packed her earlier matches had not made it into center court for this one, priced out perhaps. And without their energy, Eala seemed to tighten up just a fraction. The second set was a masterclass in resilience. Eala's fighting spirit shone through as she produced a composed and aggressive performance to halt Paolini's momentum, leveling the match at 1 set apiece. But Paolini, the more experienced player, remained the steadier competitor when it mattered most. The statistics told the story of the match. Paolini struck more winners, 38-25. She converted more break points, 4 of 9 to 3 of 10. She hit fewer double faults, 1 to 3. And crucially, she finished with a much better first serve percentage, 70% to 55%. Eala's first serve dipped as low as 65 miles per hour, a weakness that Paolini ruthlessly exploited. The third set was a war of attrition. Both players were giving everything, their lungs burning, their legs aching. The score was poised at 3-3 with the match hanging in the balance. Then at 3-4, disaster struck. A crucial break of serve handed Paolini the advantage. The Italian held her nerve, winning the final 3 games to book her place in the quarterfinals. When the final ball landed, Eala stood at the net, her head bowed. She had pushed the 2024 Wimbledon finalist to the very limit. She had won the hearts of millions. But she had also lost. As she walked off center court, the applause was deafening. The crowd was not applauding a defeat. They were applauding a journey. They were applauding a woman who had given everything. Eala herself was gracious in defeat. Every match is different.
You always find solutions.
The opponent is always finding ways to make you uncomfortable, she said after the match. She admitted that her serve was not at its best, but accepted it as part of the sport. I have days like that. Everyone has days where they don't play their best tennis. Despite the loss, Eala took immense pride in her performance. Her Wimbledon run had strengthened her reputation as a rising force on the WTA Tour. She had now won 7 of her last 11 matches against top 10 opponents, proving she could compete with the best in the world. The focus, she said, remained on growth, execution, and trusting the process. But in the WTA offices, a different emotion was stirring: panic. Within hours of Eala's defeat, the economic impact began to surface. Ticket prices for the remaining Wimbledon matches crashed to record lows, as low as £6 in some instances. The numbers were staggering, and the tournament organizers were left scrambling to understand what had just happened. The Eala Effect had been a financial phenomenon. Her matches had packed stadiums, with Filipino fans traveling from across the UK and Europe to watch her play. The support had been overwhelming, with thousands of fans gathering at the Philsports Arena in Pasig to watch her fourth-round clash, the venue opening its doors 4 hours ahead of the local scheduled start time of 9:30 p.m. so fans could secure their seats. But now, with her exit, the demand had evaporated. The contrast was stark. Just days earlier, Eala's matches had been the hottest tickets in town, with fans struggling to secure seats at any price. Her victory over Swiatek had captured the imagination of almost the entire 120 million population of the Philippines. Now, empty seats told a different story. The Eala Effect was not just about ticket sales, it was about media coverage, social media engagement, and global interest in the sport, and all of that had vanished overnight. But perhaps the most telling sign of the Eala Effect's economic power came from the fans themselves. Roberto Ocampo Jr., a London-based nurse who had followed Eala's matches closely, spoke for millions when he described what she meant to the Philippines. "She's like a ray of hope for the Philippines," Ocampo said. "Especially at her age, she made history. That's one thing that we can tell to the next generation." The fans who had packed the stadiums were not just spectators. They were a movement. They had come not just to watch tennis, but to celebrate their heritage, their culture, and their pride in a young woman who was carrying the hopes of a nation on her shoulders. And when Eala was gone, they did not simply go home quietly. The economic data told a brutal story. Eala had secured $300,000, approximately $396,100, in prize money for reaching the fourth round. Her Wimbledon run had already given her the biggest paycheck of her career, but the tournament itself was suffering. The sponsorship offers that had been certain to roll in for the 21-year-old were now being reassessed. The big money sponsors who had been looking at Eala as a potential partner were now watching to see if her popularity would endure beyond this single tournament. Eala's appeal to sponsors had been built on her huge support back home in the Philippines, where she had taken over from boxing legend Manny Pacquiao as the nation's biggest sporting icon. She already had sponsorship deals with Nike, Globe Telecom, Babolat, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Milo Philippines, and Locally Juice. But the question now was whether the premium brands would continue to fight to add her to their list of ambassadors after the disappointment of the fourth-round exit. Britain's Emma Raducanu had benefited from lucrative sponsorship deals after her shock U.S. Open win, landing deals with Tiffany & Co., Evian, British Airways, Vodafone, and several more major brands over the following years, estimated to have earned well in excess of $15 million from sponsorship deals. Eala, who appeared to be more robust physically, having played a relatively full schedule since her breakthrough tournament at the Miami Open, was positioned to reap similar rewards. But the crash in ticket prices after her exit sent a warning signal to the commercial world. The WTA was facing a crisis of its own making. They had built the tournament narrative around Eala, and when she left, the narrative collapsed. The sponsors who had been circling were now hesitating. The broadcasters who had been clamoring for Eala's matches were now struggling to fill airtime. And the fans who had filled the stadiums were demanding answers. Social media exploded with demands for her return. Fans from across the globe took to platforms to express their outrage at the ticket price crash, to share their memories of Eala's historic run, and to call on tournament organizers to do everything in their power to bring her back. The hashtags trended for days, the voices grew louder, and the WTA was left scrambling to respond. The governing body had seen the power of the Eala Effect. They had witnessed the chaos, the crowds, the uncontrolled energy, and now they were witnessing something even more powerful, the backlash of a fan base that refused to be ignored. Because when you build your tournament around a phenomenon, you cannot simply move on when that phenomenon disappears. The fans demand answers, and they demand her return. The final chapter of this story is not about ticket prices or economic aftershocks. It is about what the WTA learned or failed to learn from the Eala Effect. And it is about a nation that has finally found its hero. Alex Eala had become more than a tennis player. She had become a symbol of hope for a nation of 110 million people. She had turned stadiums into celebrations of Filipino culture. She had inspired thousands of young girls to pick up a racket. And she had done it all with humility, grace, and an unwavering belief in herself. Her custom Nike visor bearing the Tagalog phrase, "Every dream begins as a seed. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped," was not just a fashion statement. It was a philosophy that had resonated with millions. The Sampaguita hair tie that Nike had given her as a tribute to her roots was a reminder of where she came from and everything that brought her to center court. I think it's so sentimental to be able to wear things or to carry parts of my culture with me on court. Because of course it's a huge reason as to who I am, Eala had explained. Now she was bringing that culture home. On July 15, 2026, just days after her historic Wimbledon run, Eala returned to the Philippines to a hero's welcome. Thousands of fans packed the NIA Terminal 3, waving flags and chanting her name. The Philippine Tennis Association was there. The Banda Kawayan Pilipinas performed with their tribal instruments. And Eala herself was overwhelmed. Is this really all for me? She beamed upon her arrival. The homecoming was a celebration of everything she had achieved. 3 fan meet events were scheduled across the week, hosted by her sponsors Nike, BPI, and Globe. The nation was finally able to embrace its hero in person. But the celebration was also tinged with questions. Behind the outpouring of praise from President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., senators, and other public officials, questions remained over how much government support had actually helped shape one of the country's greatest tennis players. The Philippine government supports its athletes primarily through the Philippine Sports Commission, which received P1.275 billion under the 2025 General Appropriations Act. Yet publicly available records provide little clarity on how much funding reached Eala. In 2020, the PSC had announced P3 million in financial assistance following her French Open Junior campaign, a claim her family immediately disputed, saying they had not received a single centavo. The PSC later apologized, explaining the funds had been approved but not yet released. 6 years later, the questions remained. But for Eala, the focus was no longer on government support. It was on the future. She was projected to compete in the Cincinnati Open, the Toronto Open, and the National Bank Open in the United States and Canada. She had earned £300,000 from her Wimbledon run, bringing her total prize money for the 2026 season to over $1.2 million. And she had established herself as one of the most marketable athletes in the world. Her appeal to sponsors was undeniable. She already had deals with Nike, Globe Telecom, Babolat, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Milo Philippines, and Locally Juice. The premium brands were now certain to be fighting to add her to their list of ambassadors. Britain's Emma Raducanu had earned well in excess of $15 million from sponsorship deals after her US Open win, and Eala was positioned to reap similar rewards. The Eala Effect was not just about ticket sales. It was about a movement that had captured the world's attention, and that movement was only just beginning. The fans who had packed the stadiums were not just spectators. They were a community. They had come not just to watch tennis, but to celebrate their heritage, their culture, and their pride in a young woman who was carrying the hopes of a nation on her shoulders. And when Eala returned to the Philippines, they were there to welcome her home. The WTA had been given a choice. They could embrace the Eala Effect and ride the wave of popularity she was generating. Or they could resist it, impose their protocols, and risk alienating the very fans they were trying to attract. The ticket price crash had been a warning sign. The question now was whether the governing body had learned its lesson. Eala's Wimbledon run had done something that no amount of government funding or marketing could have accomplished. It had united a nation, it had inspired a generation, and it had proven that a young girl from the Philippines could compete with the best in the world. Was this just a ticket price crash? Or was it the moment tennis realized it needed Alex Eala as much as she needed them? And as the Filipina sensation prepares for the US Open and the hardcourt swing, one question echoes through the empty stands. Will the WTA finally recognize the value of its brightest new star,